Hello, I am Elan Kelman from University College London in the UK and the University of Agder in Norway. You are listening to the Coffee and Geography podcast, so grab yourself a brew and enjoy the listen.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Coffee and Geography podcast. And I have a climate ambassador that I have met in person who's not from my own region. It's from the London region of the scheme. Chris Churchman. Good morning. Yes, still morning. Good morning to you.
Hi, Kit Murray. Hi. Yeah, I'm still in the time
Yeah.
zone, having been 3 hours later in Chile for most of this week. So still getting back into
Yes.
UK time zone.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, Chile's what is it? 5 or 6 hours behind? More?
Yeah, at the moment it would be, what is it, 11? So it'd be 8 in the morning. And the sun would just be coming up. It's really weird,
Oh.
actually. One of the things about Chile, which is odd, is their late sunrise and late sunset. So sun doesn't set till 8, although it's autumn now, sun doesn't set till 8 o'clock, but doesn't come up till
Hmm.
7:30 or so.
Ah, that's yeah. So they're actually further. They're actually further east. So they're only 3 hours. And then when our clocks. So folks, if you're not aware, then we have our. We're going to lose our
For the
hours of
west,
sleep.
they're for the west. We're for the
Yeah. Rest. Yeah. Sorry. I mean,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
completely bodged those. Completely bodged that visuals. I mean, further east in terms of the American continent. That's what I meant. I completely bodged that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
thanks for correcting me on that,
yeah,
Chris. But yeah. So they're currently there's only a 3 hour difference, which is smaller than you'd think. But it's going to become 4 hours when our clocks go forward because I don't
yeah,
think they do clock
yeah,
adjustment, do
absolutely.
they?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay. So, to introduce Chris, before I forget, folks, so Chris is an ex landscape architect, now public speaker, raising awareness of the value of nature in offsetting climate change. He is the director of Sequester, which is your new company, which is all
Yeah.
about sequestration and its importance in driving towards net zero, which is fantastic. And I know you want to talk a lot about that because it is. And I remember our discussion that we've had in the past. It's like it's one of these things where nature-based solutions of sequestration is not talked about enough as it should, and I'm absolutely 100% on board with you on that one. So a bit later on, we'll definitely going to be looking at that in a bit
Sure.
deeper. So with your what are you bringing to the coffee house today? So you've gone to my coffee house counter, and what have you ordered over the coffee house counter for
Yeah.
today?
Well, I'm afraid when it comes to coffee, I don't go for anything too exciting. I like instant coffee. I know that makes me a pretty unusual beast, but your sort of bog standard Tesco's brand or Nescafe is just fine by me. Yeah, much to the annoyance of my wife, but yeah, I quite like instant coffee.
Is, is she a bit more of a coffee connoisseur
There's
then?
I mean, it's not. Neither of us drink, gallons of Colombian or Costa Rican brand, but so she eats. Well, actually, she drinks green tea now. I mean, there's one of the things about being sort of late 60s, early 70s, is that you suddenly become very aware of cholesterol, or your doctor becomes aware of it if you don't. So, green tea obviously is fantastic for cholesterol. So she's heavily into that, and
Hmm.
and she keeps pressurizing me to equally join her. So no doubt I will, but for the time being, I'm still on, most of the time
Fair
anyway, still
enough.
on
Fair
instant
enough.
instant brand
Yeah. Okay.
Nescafe.
It's great. That's the same advice that was just been given to my father recently. Cut down on your tea. Start changing your diet. Your cholesterol levels are too high, and he's exactly the same age group. So he's in his late 60s, going into his, yeah, he'll be 70 this year. Crikey. Hi, Dad. Love you. So,
Yeah,
you're based in the like Twickenham area. Um, but
correct.
the Hampton Hill area of London. So I'm just going to put that up on the screen for folks. And I said to a couple of guests ago, I said, why have I not been doing this recently? Where like if you're watching, folks, rather than if you're listening, we'll describe it for you. Don't worry. But if you're watching, why am I not putting like a map on the screen so people can actually see? And this is supposed to be coffee and geography. I mean, seriously, I'm dropping the ball. So if on the screen, folks, if you can't see it because you're listening in the car or something like that, so you've got London. If you picture it in your head, we have what we sometimes call the giant roundabout or the London Ring Road, which is the M25. And Twickenham is kind of like west southwest kind of port like segment, if you imagine a wedge from the centre of London. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about your area, Chris, and the Hampton Hill area, because London is greener than people realise, and I've noticed there's a lot of green space around where you live in Twickenham and Teddington and all that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what that map doesn't show is that I live right opposite Bushy Park. So Bushy is one of the royal parks, one of the 8 royal parks, and within southwest London, for us, you can literally walk 25 miles. If I step into the park, which I can do within 100 meters of my house, I can then walk the 25 miles without going in a single high street. I can go from Bushy Park through into Richmond Park, through into Wimbledon Common, and then all the way back again. And I do that, because of, as we'll come to later, I'm doing this sort of training for my cross country walk, so I need to walk, significant distances. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, you could really, literally can walk, still within suburban London, through those 3 parks and not touch any high street whatsoever. And you do get that wildlife, and more. So, I see all sorts within those parks, from owls, herons, lots of dogs,
Wow.
unfortunately, but pretty much all forms of wildlife. And you can see them. I mean, you have to go at the right time of the morning to see some of them, like the owl. You only tend to get at dusk. Oh, sorry, at dawn, and probably at dusk as well. But sparrowhawks. So some pretty rare species, and they're all sort of living there. And I mean, I do feel blessed, to be perfectly honest. It is such a fantastic asset to have on your doorstep, and lots of pesky squirrels as well, of course, um, and lots of chat within the water features. Uh, but yeah, I think we have in Bushy Park alone we have 3 herd of deer, and then there's another 3 or 4 in Richmond. I don't think there are any in Wimbledon Common, but deer are fairly a common sight for us. Yeah, and in the autumn, when the rutting season starts up, they can be pretty scary. There's a lot of bellowing going on. Yeah,
I can imagine.
so
This is just so incredible. I mean, I'm so gutted. So when I came down to St Mary's in Twickenham, when we did the workshop together for the people who train geography teachers, like I didn't realise that this place. Well, no, I really didn't know that this place existed, and it was just not too far away. I would have spent a
yeah,
bit of time there if I had the chance. I was there for 3 days. Oh, what a thing I've missed! Oh, I'm
yeah,
gonna have to make that a thing now because that's just amazing. And people, if you're not looking, the pictures that just go onto Google Maps, right? And the good thing about Google Maps nowadays is that you can look at pictures and videos of people have taken, like crowdsourced kind of thing of the area, and there's big deer with antlers walking around. That picture of the heron was gorgeous. Look at that.
yeah,
That's just it's such love. So, and then when people think, especially if you're not, I guess if you're not, okay, I'm going to be very geographically minded about this. If you're not from certain parts of London, whether it's somewhere else in London or outside of London or internationally, you would never ever think this was London if I'd shown these images, and so that is fantastic. And in fact, I think when you were talking about like walking from different places in London, a couple of years ago I spoke to Helen Illis, and I don't know if you know about this, Chris, but you might be aware of this because of your interest. But she created something called the Green Ground Map, which is like a tube
okay,
map, but it
okay,
connects all these green spaces and wild spaces for you to
yeah,
literally walk from place to place throughout the whole London. Oh, so yeah,
yeah, sure.
It's an incredible place. Is this one of your favourite places around where you live then? I mean, it was the first thing that came to your mind.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I'd be walking 3 or 4 times a week, normally early in the morning between 7 and 9, and I do genuinely feel that I am blessed. I have such a fantastic life because of the rural parks. I mean, they are such a beautiful asset, and hats off to the rural parks as well. They don't do everything right, but in the main, they manage to keep what is an incredible sort of incredibly valuable natural asset from all perspectives. I mean, most of the soil there is thousands of years old, literally. So the amount of carbon that must be in there is phenomenal. They don't have enough trees at the
Yeah.
moment because most of their trees are veteran, 400 years old, and they're not probably doing enough in terms of replacing them. But overall, the Royal Parks, I think those Royal Parks, Richmond Park and Bushy Park, are just an amazing asset. And Bushy in particular has become an SSSI. It was recognised about 12 months ago, I think, as an
Yeah.
SSSI. Um, yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Right. I think I'll I'm gonna see if I can get you and put you in touch with Helen who designed the green ground map. I think
Okay.
you two could
Yeah,
have a
do
really
so.
interesting conversation. She's a
Yeah.
fantastic being.
Yeah.
She's originally from Estonia, but I haven't spoken to her for
Okay.
a while, so it'll be a good excuse for me to kind of touch base with her and see if I connect you together. So yeah, folks, I'll
Yeah.
put a link in the description of my chat with Helen when she was talking about the process of creating the green ground map because it is such a great thing. And just what Chris has just said, folks, London is greener than you think, and that's one of the reasons why folks like Dan Raven Ellison has and other folks have set up the London City National Park. Because there is so much green space, and why I think climate ambassadors in London, like Chris and things like that, have quite a lot to work with actually in terms of nature-based solutions in London and things like this and absorbing yourself in nature. It's pretty incredible. So are you from the Twickenham area then Chris, or have you come to it at a certain part of your life? Because a question I like to ask
Yeah.
folks at in the podcast is how is the place you're living now like formed your identity, and how are other places that you've been through throughout your life have kind of like how have they come together to form the Chris of today? So are you Twickenham
Yeah.
through and
Sure.
through, or have any of your travels, because you've been to the Middle East and have any of
Yeah.
your travels informed your identity today? Yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Okay. So I think I'm more of a product of where I was born. So I was born in Derby, and I lived in a place called Spondon for about 5 years. Then my dad, much to the annoyance of my grandfather, bought a house in this place called Ockbrook, which is right on the sort of edge of Derby. And he bought it because it had this view. So the house was on top of a hill, and it had this view out over fields. And so, if anything has had a sort of meaningful impact on my view of landscape and what it's about, then that's probably it. I was brought up from the kitchen window every day looking at this sort of quite beautiful landscape. And then also I was in Venture Scouts when I was between, I suppose, 16, 19. And so every weekend pretty much I was in the Peak District, and it was effectively a sort of big pub crawl. We would do some pretty serious walking, so 20 miles across a peaked bog on Kinder Scout. But there was always a lot of drinking involved as well. So quite a sort of dangerous combination. But nevertheless, we did it, and then probably drove home afterwards. But we did it, and so I suppose that sort of love of wild places has always been with me, and still is. And so, I mean, I through my years when I had kids and was bringing those up, I was the complete opposite. And I mentioned in the form that you sent to me, I mentioned that I spent 10 years just looking at the sort of four walls of the inside of a swimming pool because my son was a very good swimmer, and so his whole life, and so my whole life was taken up with swimming. And so, every evening he'd be training, and every weekend he'd be competing, and I just spent all this time in this horrendous box with a swimming pool in the middle of it. And I suppose, once he got to sort of 17, 18 and could drive himself, and so I didn't need to be the sort of taxi driver anymore, I sort of reverted to type and went back to the wilds with my mates actually. So I still walk with two groups of friends, one from university, one from home, and we still meet up. We probably don't do the sort of 20 plus miles plus the drinking anymore. We do half the distance, and we only drink at the end. But nevertheless, we still do it, so we still get out, and I love it. And then I do a certain amount of walking solo. So my wife thinks I'm a very sad character. Keep telling me I need more friends. But I don't mind. You know, it's not that I want to go out walking by myself. I mean, why would you? But if nobody says, "Yeah, I'm going to come with you, Chris," then I just go by myself. I'm not going to not go because nobody else has got the time or whatever. So I do a lot of solo walking, but I do like being with other people as well. It's not that I'm a complete sort of introvert and Billy no mates.
Ah, it's the perfect time actually to spill the beans early on in the conversation. I usually do it a bit later, and that is you set off alone last September to walk the 400 miles from Lowestoft, which, folks, is
Yeah,
the furthest
yeah,
east point. I'll bring up a map in a
it
minute,
is.
to Pembrokeshire on the west. So did you? So have you had some company for the bit that you've done so far, and what's your plan to
No,
finish
no, I
that?
didn't. No, that was all. That was all solo.
Okay.
And in a way, it's actually better that it was because I think you tend to, when you're walking by yourself, number one, you absorb more because you're looking around. But I think also you think, it enables you. It's great thinking time walking by yourself because
Mm.
you tend to reflect on things. And so I suppose my sort of change in my career, going from running a landscape architectural practice, which was a group of 30 people, to being setting up Sequester, which is just me, that all really sort of came about during COVID, and particularly a sort of week in the Cairngorms. So when we had the first release of lockdown in COVID, I went camping for a week in the Cairngorms, and it was October. It was bloody freezing in this one man tent, and I decided then I was going to have a change of career. I wasn't going to stay in landscape anymore. I was going to take to social media and start talking about climate change and things. So yeah, that's the distance. So
Mm.
I set out to walk it
Whew.
in about 2.5 weeks, 20 nights, I think it was, which is about sort of 25 miles a day. And I got to 110 miles in a place called Ramsbury, which is
Yep.
right on the edge of the western edge of the fens. And
Yeah. So like here-ish.
my
Yeah.
feet were terrible. My feet were just completely shot. And so I couldn't have done the next day. So I had to abandon.
Oh.
Um, Good thing I did actually, because that night there was a sort of complete deluge. And that kept going for another month. So I would have been soaked the rest of the time. So I sort of pulled out at that stage. But in the beginning of May, I go back. So I start again in Ramsbury
Uh-huh.
and then walk through to St David's Head, which is 300 miles. Um, so this time I should be able to do it in about 15 nights if I've planned it correctly. And I'll go through Northampton, down to Warwick, across to Hereford, and then up the Wye Valley, and then sort of working my way westward to Haverford West, and then finally St David's Head. Yeah,
Mm.
so
So
that's the plan.
Ramsbury is that? It's not Borough, is
Ramsbury's
that?
is Ramsbury's well just to the sort of east of where Cambridge is. Yeah, that's pretty
Came.
much it.
Ah, right. Okay. I was just seeing if I could put that
So
waypoint on the map, but I'm not by ways.
it's the
But yeah,
Great Fen. It's in the Great Fen, so
yeah. So it'll be
it's
around here.
right
Yeah.
on the yeah. So you've got this main east coast line forms the western edge of it. So once you pass there, then you're into Northamptonshire.
Yeah. That's it, folks. So yeah. So the Great Fens is a very very interesting part of our country, really. So you actually just as that was
Yeah,
loading up, you can see this coloration of the physical map here, which is really interesting. The reason why you've got this
yeah,
coloration, which goes very far south, like as far south as Cambridge, is because this all used to be underwater. This used to be marshland when the sea levels
yeah,
were a little bit higher and before they were drained for navigation and for farming. And it's a very distinct part of our. And in fact, you can see the delineation there when the landscape suddenly changes and it starts to get a little bit more undulating and higher. So you can picture this whole bit. And of course, when you get those classic maps of sea level rise about, oh, this is what our world could look like out of so many feet of sea level rise, this bit suddenly goes missing. You know, so that's a really interesting landscape to do. And the other thing that's really interesting as well is that the person I share an office with at the University of East Anglia, Katie Jenkins, Dr. Katie Jenkins, her current research, one of her research projects and her community-based projects is all about climate change in the fens. So it's really, you know, and how the communities are adapting, adjusting, and including the farmers and things like that. And it's just like, it's such an interesting thing. So,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it is a really
it's a
bizarre
really interesting
landscape, and
part of
if
the
you haven't
country.
been there, yeah, I mean, if you haven't been, you should do so because there are very physical manifestations of the processes that have taken place over 400 years. So basically, what happened was that there was a group of entrepreneurs, the gentlemen something investors, I think, who decided that they were going to drain the fens. And so they brought in a Dutchman, and that's what happened. Obviously, because they knew that if they drained the fens, then it'd go from marshland to a very productive area of farmland. The problem is that when you drain peat, which effectively it is, then the peat shrinks, and it has shrunk, and so the levels,
Mm,
it's not just sea levels rising, the land levels have dropped, and by 5 meters. And so if you turn the pumps off today, it'd be flooded now. So
yep.
there are the lowest lying roads. Some of the roads I walked on were the lowest lying roads in the UK, and they're 5 meters below sea level.
Yes,
Um,
they are.
I mean, I must admit, it started raining when I was doing it, so I certainly got a shift on because I think occasionally they do still flood, and so if you get caught halfway, you are in trouble. But it's an unforgiving landscape, an unrelenting landscape, and scale becomes so different.
Oh
You
goodness.
just sort of see this dot on the horizon. You think, "Oh my God, that's the road I've got to get to." That's a car, and the whole thing around distance is completely different to our normal perception of distance. So
Yeah.
you look at something on a map and you think, okay, that's 10, 15 minutes, I'll walk that. 2 hours later, you're
Right.
still on the
Yes.
same line. You think, oh my God, this is just relenting.
Yeah. Yeah. And folks,
And no
if you know,
pubs, that's the other thing.
no pubs, no pubs.
No
Yeah.
pubs. So, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, the communities there long since left. And so
Mm,
no pubs. Yeah, you could be walking a whole day and not pass a pub, and you think, oh,
yeah.
yeah, this is not good.
No, one of my favourite places there. I'm gonna get this wrong because it's one of my favourite places, and I can never remember the actual name. It's like East Heckington or something like that, or some, which is kind of on the western end of it. There's this lovely little farm shop like Abbey Parks. I think it was an independent, but now it's been sold off, unfortunately. Which we used to stop. I used to take when I used to take the kids up to Yorkshire Dales from Norwich. We used to stop there all the time, and just absorb the landscape. And folks, if you think like Montana is the big sky, in terms of being famous, you haven't seen anything until you've seen the landscape and the skies of the fens, right? It really is
Mm,
quite incredible, and I love what you did there, Chris, about linking everything with the history and with the geography and the physical geography as well. Because of course, one
mm.
of the one of the areas of the fens, there's a sign you walk past or drive past says, "Welcome to Little Holland," because that
Yeah,
it
yeah,
it goes back to that history with the Dutch and the fact
yeah,
that the landscape is very familiar to people in the Netherlands and things like that. And I just love that. And this is a perfect time now, Chris, I think, to start talking about Sequester and what you were talking about, because you said about peat and soil. So I think we should let's talk about soil as your thing says right here.
Yeah, well, so okay, so soil is a topic that most people don't engage with, and I can
Oh,
understand why,
this is great.
but
It's going to be good.
it is probably the most valuable resource in terms of climate change. So yes, I mean, as this slide says, in 2015, the French, being the French, they were very sort of bullish about being able to resolve climate change completely just through soil health. So they
Mm,
came up with this calculation 4 per mille, which is basically if you improve soil health by 0.4% per year, then you would resolve climate change. That would be it, done and dusted. No need for renewable
oh,
energy. No, nothing else. You would just do it through this. Now there's been a lot of rowing back on that ever since, but it's still, by respectable bodies and organisations, it's still
mm,
expected that 30% of climate change emissions will be dealt with through soil health, and I think that will increasingly become the case because, you know, yes, we have already um, reduced our carbon emissions in the UK. We've dropped already by about 40% since 1990. So, we're already well on that path to net
yeah.
zero. But the problem is that renewable energy can't do it all. You can't do it 100% with renewable energy. You'll get to about 65, 70%. If you get to total
Mm,
renewable, all energy comes from renewables, you will still only get to 65, 70%. So you've got to find the rest somewhere else. And then soil
yeah.
becomes our best solution by a long, long way. It's the sort of easiest thing to do. And it's not that nobody understands, because I mean, some of the scientists know this, but they never talk about it. And
Mm,
for a long time, I couldn't work out why. And so when last autumn, there was one day when Keir Starmer said we're going to reduce climate change by, I think it's 80%, 80% reduction in emissions by whenever. And so they brought on the guy from the Committee of Climate Change, and he was sort of giving the sort of spiel on Radio 4. And he said, he was saying basically it's all about renewables and it's all about driving electric cars. I thought, no, it's not. That's complete bullshit. And it's, why are you saying this? And I couldn't work out. Then I thought, I know the reason why. And it's because we don't pay for soil and we never will pay for soil, whereas we will always pay
mm,
for electric cars and we'll always pay for a new hydrogen central heating boiler or whatever. So the replacement central heating boilers and replacement cars we as consumers pay for. So the government doesn't want to cloud the issue. It's actually beneficial for the government if we all think that's all it is. Just solve those two things and we're done and dusted. Because then there's more of a case, more likelihood that we'll go out and spend the money. Whereas if they say, well, yeah, but it's those, but it's also these other things, then it sort of makes it a lot more complex and a lot more sort of nuanced, I suppose. And so we're less
mm,
likely, even though most of us still don't want to spend our money on these things. We're going to become even more disincentivized to spend our money if
yeah.
um, we think there is an alternative, which there isn't. Clearly renewables and electric cars are a must do. We can't not do them, but you've got to do the other things as well. Yeah. And then the other
Yeah.
statistic here is 90% of the UK is still not built on. Now, there's places in the UK where it's less than that. So, but it's still, I think the lowest is around 85%, even in the southeast of England. If you go up to Scotland, obviously, it's high 90s. I mean, globally, it's 99 point something of the world is still not built on. So we still tread on the world very, very lightly. And so I come from the development sector. So I spent 40 years as a landscape architect working with developers. And so architects and developers have convinced themselves, and they like to convince us, that they can solve climate change. That climate change is all to do with buildings. There's
Mm,
this number that architects regularly trot out: 49% of all climate change emissions come from buildings. And that statistic, in a way, is true because the source is a building, but it's not the building that's causing the climate change. It's the way we heat the building. I have
Mm.
lived in 12 houses in my life, and all of them are older than I am, so they're all more than 70 years old. None of them were built with central heating. None of them were built with double glazing, and yet we expect those things now because of our view around comfort. So it's our view around
Right.
comfort which is driving climate change, not building lots and lots of houses. You can build houses, and obviously you can make them so they're well insulated. But the problem is, whatever you do about building houses, we've still got a lot of houses which are very inefficient from an energy perspective, and so they're still in 50 years' time they'll still be pumping greenhouse gases out into the atmosphere. So unless you
Mm.
make their energy source renewable, then they're still going to be pumping out greenhouse gas
Right.
emissions. So what I came to realise was that the landscape had to be a big part of the problem of climate change. It could not be part of the problem. If you've got 90% of your country still green, then clearly it's got to be producing some of the problem, and it has to give you some other solutions as well. And so soil, because
Mm.
soil is sort of fundamental part of green landscapes, that has to be a big part of the problem. And the other thing that no one ever speaks about is that a lot of our greenhouse gas emissions come from food production. About
Okay.
half of that
Yeah.
is from the farm, and the other half is from the sort of taking the food source and then going through a sort of production stage and moving it around the country and wrapping it and all the rest. So
Yeah.
yeah, 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from food, and no one ever talks about this apart from the National Food Strategy, which I can recommend to everybody. If you want a good read, read the National Food Strategy. It's a really it's crammed full of interesting facts. It was written by Henry Dimbleby, who's still around. Probably heard of him, and it is crammed full of interesting facts about our health and about our country
Mm.
and all the rest of it. So, as a piece of social work, if nothing else, it's definitely worth having a read of.
Okay. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that climate change is an equation stripped back to its very purest form. Climate change is an equation which is about emissions and also absorption. It can't be about one or the other. It has to be about both. So I there are only two things which absorb carbon dioxide, which are trees and soil. Everything else is obviously an emitter. Historically, we've had enough trees and enough soil in good health to offset all
Right.
the emissions. So we've now got too many emissions, but we've also got not enough trees because we've been chopping them down. So in a way, for the time being at least, the only two things which are going to absorb carbon, which we have to do, are trees and soils. Now, obviously, there is
Mm.
also industrialized carbon capture, which this government is looking to fund at 21 billion, I think it is. Um,
Yes.
Carbon capture as an industrial process has been around for decades. Um, and certainly over the last 10 years, it's been mainstream, but it's not ever been bought into in a big way. I think there's only 10 plants globally which are doing it. It was a big one in Norway. It just come online. And the reason is because it's incredibly expensive and it's also incredibly energy hungry. So
Mm.
climate change perspective is not so great. So it may well be that industrialized carbon capture is the future. I'm not saying it isn't, but for the time being, all we've got is soil and trees, and you have to work with those. The way I try to get this message over to kids when I'm doing the children when I'm doing my STEM um, presentations is I like to use the analogy of chocolate. And then I say to them, I show a big picture of chocolate, and I say, if somebody ate this little piece in the middle, would it do any harm? And they will say, no, no, no. And then I say, if you ate the whole bar, would it do any harm? No, no, no. If you ate 50 bars a day, would it do any harm? Yes, of course it would. Eventually, it would kill you. And the reason is because our body has a way of um, neutralizing bad things, whether it's chocolate or drugs or alcohol or whatever, our body has a capacity to deal with a certain quantity of
Mm.
bad things. But if you have only one kidney, because it's the kidneys which are doing the filtration, if one of your kidneys packs up, or if you just throw too much alcohol at it, then clearly there's only one outcome. So it is, that analogy of quantity as opposed to something being fundamentally bad for you is
Mm.
is what I try to. So that's why I use chocolate to try and get that message across to them, and
It's a
they
good
seem to
analogy.
relate. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you talk
So
about solutions then.
yeah, so we got plant lots and lots of trees, and the UK government says they want to plant 30,000 hectares a year, which sounds impressive, but that'd be 3 years to cover Dartmoor. And if you actually wanted to get to net zero through trees alone, you'd have to plant half of our country. I worked out once. It took a Saturday
Wow.
morning to work it out. So that's not going to happen. So the other is soil health, and so our government is getting into soil health. That is not that they don't know that it's important; they do know it's important. So what they're doing is they're incentivizing farmers to improve soil health,
Hmm.
and they're paying them to do so. So farming used to be funded through basic payment scheme, which was an EU-based scheme, and when we came out of the EU, then that was abandoned or is being abandoned, and it's being replaced by systems which are based around public money for public good, and that's either biodiversity benefits or soil health benefits. And so the government is giving us our tax money now rather than just going to a farmer as a subsidy to produce food. It's now going as a subsidy to improve soil health. So there is a recognition of the importance. It's just that they're not
Hmm.
that sort of open about what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I love these quotes. So one from
Yeah,
Franklin Roosevelt and
yeah.
and Atharva Veda. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's not that people have never
criticality of
realised.
soil. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm
it's
going
not
to
that
read these
people
out for folks. So Atharva Veda, which is from Sanskrit scripture, this is kind of like 1200 BC, says, "Upon this handful of soil our survival depends. Husband it, and it will grow our food, our fuel, and our shelter, and surround us with beauty. Abuse it, and the soil will collapse and die, taking humanity with it." And then, what, 2,000, 3,000 years later, then Franklin D. Roosevelt says, "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." So, very good quotes there.
have. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and then you mentioned farming already, and this is, I think, farmers, especially, well, all around the country, but in this region of east of England in particular, I think they have such a huge part to play on this. And you mentioned, you know, this is such a crucial stakeholder that needs to be involved.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I don't know if you're aware, but there is a national land use framework which is in consultation at the moment. We never had one. So it almost beggars belief, actually. We never had a national land use framework. If 90% of your country is agricultural land, well, 70%
Right.
agricultural land, the other 20% is wilderness. But if 90% of your country is not built on, and you don't have a plan for it, you do wonder what's going on. Um,
Yeah.
so that is in consultation at the moment. It ends later this month. So it's available on the UK website. Please do have a look at it if you can. Um,
Yeah.
and my view is that the non-farmers, are really important. That the farmers are really important. I like to think that farmers were the fourth emergency service. So when we had COVID, who went out there and produced the crops? These guys did. They and never get any praise or anything for it. They never get any recognition for the work they do. But the reality is that farming has been underfunded for decades. Whilst we're in the EU, it wasn't a problem because they got subsidies, and a large part of their income came from subsidy. But then, since Brexit, I mean, suddenly now the farming subsidy, the farming budget, Rachel Reeves, for understandable reasons, is looking at it and thinking, can she shave some off it? And these poor guys are the losers. Many of them are in real dire straits. I mean, since October, November, since the budget, we've had all this stuff about inheritance tax. I don't think that's the big issue for farmers. I think that the fact that supermarkets pay them a fraction of what they should. We don't pay enough for our food, basically. We pay too little for our food. We don't pay the going rate for it. I mean, I think around Christmas, for a kilo of carrots, it was 8p or something. One of the supermarkets, or all the supermarkets, were giving away, produce because they treat produce as a lost leader. And so they treat farmers as a lost leader and as a disposable asset, and they're definitely not. I
Mm,
mean, but the problem is there's only a handful of them. I said before how my dad had bought the house in rural Derbyshire, and although I didn't hang out with farmers, I knew farmers. They were in the village and they were
yeah,
drinking
yeah.
the same pub as I did. These days, nobody knows a farmer. The farmers are a rare breed themselves. They're dying out. Uh, they've been replaced by AI and by robotics, and so no one speaks
Mm.
up for them. And so we, as society, have to speak up for them because at the end of the day, that's where our food comes from. And if we don't recognize them and recognize their value and recognize their importance, it's a road to ruin. It really is.
Mm. It really
Yeah,
is, yeah. Yeah, you know what? That is such a selling point that you've just mentioned, actually, because when I was growing up, so my family background, especially my dad's side, they a couple of generations up were dockers, and
mhm,
but before that they were farmers. In fact,
mhm,
if I go back, they were farm labourers.
yeah,
And actually, when I was growing up in Harlow in Essex, I was really attached to the farming community because the people that my dad knew and through my grandparents, they were these people that. So, for example, my godfather owns a place in Harlow, well, manages
yeah,
a place in Harlow called Pets Corner, which is a petting zoo, but it's part of like the farming community as well. So there's always like farming conventions and things that go on there. And when he was younger, before he took over as a manager there, he used to be a farmer, be on the farmer, and I used to help out every summer, to put the
mhm,
bales of hay on the back of the tractor, and being one of those 8-year-olds who would be able to kind of like put around the tractor on first gear, around stuff like that. And then when I was a teenager, I worked on a farm,
yeah,
which doubled up as a pet food distribution centre. So a place called Eastwick Lodge, and I worked there. So my even though I lived in urban an urban new town, Harlow, a new town of London, I still had quite strong connections to farming and farmers. And a lot of our family friends were farmers. But you're
yeah,
absolutely right. I'm now thinking of my kids, and I'm thinking, apart from this one visit that they went down to Harlow when my mum took them down to Harlow and took them to Pet's
mhm,
Corner and met our old friends and stuff like that, I think that's really the only connection that they've really had.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
they're lucky for that they've had that,
yeah,
where the lambing was taking place and they got to hold some lambs, and I'm thinking,
yeah.
actually, that now is a really rare occurrence. I'm struggling to think how many kids have had that experience where they've gone
Mm,
gone and seen some lambing take place, for
yeah.
example.
So you do realise Eastwick is about to be built on 10,000 new
I
homes. This is very,
know. Yes, I know. Yes. Yes. I haven't spoken to my friends and my old colleagues from Eastwick for a while, but yeah. So just a bit of context, folks. So the reason why it's such prime land because Eastwick is just north of Harlow in Essex, but the trouble is it's got plenty of land to develop, and the train station in Harlow is on
yeah,
the northern edge of town. In
yeah,
fact, it's quicker to get to Harlow town train station from villages like Eastwick, just across the river, than what it is actually from, say, another part of Harlow, say down in Sumners or something like that, which is the southeast. So it's prime estate. The only thing that stopped it happening in recent years is that the farmers were really quite keen and maintaining this land, and it's a big floodplain for the River Stort as well,
yeah,
right? So you have to go quite a bit up the bank to see that. and so eSwick has always been a target for developers,
Yeah,
always. And it seems like finally, after decades and decades and decades, that they couldn't hold back the tide by the sound of it. Or it's just taken one person to say, all right, I'll sell my land, and that's it. The dominoes start to fall.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know. I'm speculating now through my geographical knowledge, but I'm thinking that's what happened. Before we
yeah.
move on with your last bit, Chris, on this, I just want to share this. So looping it back to what we were saying at the beginning. So this is the project that Dr. Kate Jenkins and folks in the Environment Agency like Louise Wilson, who's been on the podcast before. Hopefully, I'll get to interview again because she's recently become a climate ambassador. It's exactly it. You know, a Fenland Soil, which is the partnership, a dedicated team with farmers at course to tackle climate change issues related to agriculture and peat in the fens. So, you know, this is something that I'll also put in the description, folks. So I think this is very, very worthwhile looking at. So if you're looking at, you know, I think it's a bit of a shame that that geography, GCSE and A level tends to not focus on farming as much as it did in the past, but there are still some good syllabuses and specs that do that. And if you're still hanging on to agriculture and agricultural systems, folks, especially at A level, this is worth looking at in terms of sustainable and stakeholder based and partnership based solutions to climate change in the agricultural sector. So give this a look. Strongly recommend it. Yeah,
Can
so
I
let's
just add?
finish off.
Can
Yeah,
I just
go
add?
for it. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, please do.
my personal view is that our countryside is not just about farming, and
No.
increasingly we are going to see the rural landscape becoming an economic powerhouse. Because if my proposition about capturing carbon is correct, then the value of capturing carbon is going to go up and up and up because inevitably
Yep.
there's going to be more and more pressure on us to increasingly capture carbon. So increasingly, the price of land has already been going up over the last decade by about 50%, and it will go up again significantly. The sort of
Hmm.
graph is exponential. So the future of our rural landscape is not just about farming. It's an important component, but there are a lot of other things which are coming into it, like solar panels, like wind farms. We've had moratoriums on those things for years. Those will go,
Right.
and the face of our landscape is going to change dramatically. So so it is going to be economically. There's an economic imperative behind the change as much as there
Mm.
is as a need to feed ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And talking about feeding ourselves, you know,
Yeah.
the other thing you've got on your slides here is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions per 100 grams of protein consumed. So, and it's a very common, yeah, yeah. I think. Do you think we've done a good job at actually with this side of things, like educating people to say, you know, that if you're gonna categorize your food sources, your diet, you know, we know now that beef is by far and away, for example. So and of course the way we use our land and our landscapes can be based on what we potentially use that land for in terms of our food. So as you were just mentioning.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I mean, basically, I think if you look at Generation Zs, they eat millennials. They eat a lot less meat than my generation did, and even my generation is
It's
becoming
true.
flexitarian. I mean, I think I probably have 3 or 4 meals a week which are non-meat based. So I think we're all shifting away from meat. The only thing is, though, that there is something good about cattle on grass from a climate change perspective. The reason is that we still live in a very wet country. If you live in Essex or you live in the Fens, that isn't the case. But if you
Yeah.
live on the west side of the country, it is still wet most of the time. And so from a climate change perspective, from a carbon absorption perspective, having a wet soil is a very positive thing. And having cattle walking around on grass is really good from absorbing carbon. Now, the only thing is, of course, they're obviously crapping as well, which is another source of it. Well, they're burping. It's a methane emission issue as well as crapping. But so they have their sort of carbon greenhouse gas outputs, but they are good. Cattle and sheep are good. Ruminants are good in terms of turning over the soil and working the carbon into it. So they are. It's not all bad. It's very easy sometimes to look at graph like the figures like this and think, oh yeah, we should stop
Mm.
eating meat. But it's not that simple.
Never is it? It's
No.
always more nuanced than that. Yeah,
Yeah,
why
absolutely. Yeah.
climate literacy with all
Yeah.
these things, not just that, the hockey stick graph or the
Yeah.
science behind climate change, but climate
Yeah.
change solutions. We need climate literacy with these kind of things as well, and we need to take the heat out of those kind of things, because people
Yeah.
say it's too, it's for me it's too bipolar. It is either bad or it's either good. It's Marmite,
Yeah.
right? It's like nuclear
Yeah.
power,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
don't want it
Yeah.
or we should do it. Like eating meat, stop it or fight. There's enough. It's a need. I always like to think it's a needle. It's a spectrum. You can move a needle and not only move the needle, but kind of like change the kind of like what you're doing with that. Like you said, the way that you use your cattle. If you can use your cattle in a way that you've described,
Yeah.
and say
Yeah.
move towards that model of having cattle, we can
Yeah.
still have our meat once, some of us
Yeah.
once a month or something, so it's
Yeah.
just the, it's that way of working with the natural processes, nature-based things. So Chris, when you do this stuff as a climate ambassador, then, so for folks listening who are working a school in England and particularly in your
Mm.
part in London, so you can do these talks with youngsters as well. So what would you
Mm.
say as a climate ambassador would be for, like, yeah, I obviously I can do this kind of stuff with the schools, give these kind of talks, really kind of help your youngsters get to grips with this
Mm.
stuff. And I think this kind of stuff is great, particularly for the older kids and A-level kids. But in terms of what would you say, maybe in terms of a school's climate action plan, in terms of, I don't know, thinking about their food procurement or the way that they use their soil, the way that they use their land.
Yeah.
What would you say
Yeah.
to that with your climate ambassador's hat on?
Yeah. So when I go into these groups, I mean, I've only been doing climate ambassador for around 8 months now. I mean, before that, I'd been speaking to women's institutes for about 4 or 5 years, and and
Yeah.
in a way, I think I was a great grounding because women's institutes are a tough gig. I mean, they really are hard, and they certainly tell you if they don't agree with what you're saying. So in
Oh
a way,
yes. Oh
I was
yes.
not phased by having to go into a class, a class of 13, 14 year olds. Um, I feel that the important thing is to come up with metaphors, and so I use chocolate a lot of the time. I use chocolate as my metaphor. So carbon credits, I hand out chocolate coins. I find out who doesn't like chocolate. There's always somebody in the class doesn't like chocolate, and so I give them a couple of chocolate coins, and then I give someone who loves chocolate another couple of coins, and they said, "Okay, are you going to give one of your chocolate coins to the person who really wants it?" And they say, "No." So you're going to sell it, and they say, "Yes." And I said, "Well, that's how carbon credits work. That's the same idea." And the other thing I try to do is to get them to relate people that they can understand and relate to from a climate change perspective.
Mm.
So I use Taylor Swift, I use Cole Palmer, and I
Okay.
use
Yep.
I use one of the Kardashians. Cole Palmer, because although he plays for Chelsea at the moment, who are not underwritten by oil money, a lot of football is underwritten by oil money, so that's all going to change. Taylor Swift couldn't do the Eras tour, of course, because she couldn't fly all her group around. And then the Kardashians, I say, okay, so how did she communicate with all of you? And they all say, oh, yeah, on our mobile phones. And what's in a mobile phone? It's a battery. And what's in the battery? Lithium. And have you thought about, how do you produce lithium? Because it's an incredibly rare metal and incredibly
Mm.
climate damaging from a climate change perspective. So all of these three groups um, have their lifestyles will change. I mean, they will, and so if theirs are, then yours are. And in a few weeks' time, I have to go and give that sort of talk to the Women's Institute. So I had to change the characters. So I've gone for Madonna, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Meghan
Oh.
Markle. Meghan Markle is the so I'm going to say that behind every dark cloud, there's always a silver lining. If Megan can't communicate anymore on her mobile phone, then there has to be a plus to climate change.
Wow. Um, Right, so Chris, we're going to bring this conversation to a close now. It's been a fantastic hour. Thank you so much. So we're going to link you to our previous guest then, and I think you're gonna love this. So the We Are All Geographers is where we connect you folks
Yeah.
using a single word that you've got to talk to about 30 seconds. And I actually think that this is a perfect one for you, really, given that what you've been talking about. So Adrian Ferrero, who's from runs the Bioasis, which is great, which is like a getting an escape into nature for young people, which is really good down in the southwest. He says that he would like you to talk about for 30 seconds. He's giving you the word tomato. Tomato.
What?
So
Wow.
whenever you're ready, Chris, I want you to riff
Yeah.
about tomato or tomatoes for 30 seconds.
Okay, well, tomatoes, as I know, because I grow loads of them, are a very sort of energy intensive process. I mean, number one, you've got to start the seed growing at a reasonably high temperature, normally I think at 18 plus degrees. And then you've got to take them through that sort of initial establishment process. And then you've got to go into the greenhouse every day and nip out the trusses, the middle trusses, to
Yes.
make sure that you've got enough fruit coming on the plant. And then at the end of the season, of course, if you're growing them in your garden, they all come at the same time. I mean, how
Of course they do.
unfortunate is that? If we had a tomato that would crop from March through to December, we'd be laughing. But they all come in the second week of September, and then you've got a
I know, right?
mountain of
I know, right?
tomatoes that you have to, and everybody else has got the same thing. So they're pretty
Right.
crap from climate change perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Put it this way: when we've tried to grow tomatoes here at home, we usually end up with having a lot of fried green tomatoes. Yeah, let's put it that way.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, Chris, that's fantastic. So for my next guest, when I talk to them, what word would you like? I can't tell you who it is because you know
Yeah.
they things get rescheduled, so it's just a blind thing. What word would you like for the following guest to say for 30
Okay,
seconds?
so I thought about this because it's just coming. And if this is too tricky, then just tell me. I was going to do own, the verb to own. So
To own.
yeah. So
To own.
well, it could be on one zone, or to own something, because I think ownership
Oh.
is, yeah, quite a big
I'm
issue.
trying
Is
to.
that
Is it? Have we
too
had a verb?
tricky?
No, no, it's brilliant. I'm just trying to look back at the We Are All Geographers list and see if we've had anything like that. We've had yeah, to own. We've not. No, that's the first time. Okay, to have,
Okay.
you know. So we've had things like openness and
Okay.
yeah, but nothing like that. That's brilliant.
I,
Okay, okay,
I
folks. So
prefer
there we go.
tomato
Tune
to
in next
openness.
week. Okay, folks. So, Chris, obviously, folks can touch base with you via the Climate Ambassador Scheme.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
Chris is based in the London region. So that's my dear friend and colleague Lachlan Attack, who's the London regional hub manager. And how else can people connect with you, Chris?
So I'm on LinkedIn. So you just type in Chris Churchman, and then my LinkedIn profile will come up. I have been, over the last few weeks, been producing a little blog each week on this land use framework. So have a look at that. And then I also have an Instagram account, which is
Oh,
what is it? Outside number 9.co.uk.
okay,
Outside number 9.co.uk. Yeah, on Instagram.
yeah,
So
okay.
that's
Yeah, we
mainly
can
photos
verify
of
that.
my
Put it in the link.
garden, but and chili.
Oh yes, yeah. We didn't get the time to talk about but we'll get people to have a look at your pictures of Chile.
Yeah.
And finally, have you got anyone you want to give a shout out to say hello to?
No, as I say, my wife thinks I'm sad. Actually, if anybody knows a couple of people who I think are really important from a farming perspective, Emily Norton, if anybody's come across Emily, and Rachel Madley Davis, I think they're fantastic ambassadors for the farming community. And someone from your area, Thomas Gent, actually, he's from your area. He's a Lincolnshire farmer.
Okay.
So yeah, anybody knows those people, they are, it's not all bad from a farming perspective. There are some very forward-thinking people out there. So yeah.
Yes. Okay, folks. Well, Chris, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you for spending some of your morning with me and with our listeners and watchers. And
My pleasure.
and thank you for all the work that you're doing, and also through the Climate Ambassador Scheme.
Great. Okay. Thanks a lot, Larry. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Coffee and Geography, folks. If you're itching to know more about the Climate Ambassador's awesome work, visit www.climateambassadors.org. Don't forget to follow us on Blue Sky at geogramblings.com and use the CoffeeJogPod hashtag to stay in the loop. Submit your questions for our guests on LinkedIn or Blue Sky with hashtag JogQOverABrew. Keep exploring this amazing world, tackling climate action, and flexing your geography muscles. Stay curious, keep jogging, and keep making waves.